Well, welcome everybody. I'm Malcolm Chalmers. I'm going to be chairing this session, and I'm the Deputy Director General here at RUSI and a past Director of PONI UK. And this is a rather different panel from the others on this programme, but none the worse for that. And I think it really reflects one of the key functions of PONI as it has evolved over the years. It's primarily a next generation outfit, and one of the things our annual conference in particular tries to do is provide opportunities for those starting out on their careers in the nuclear field to talk to others in that area, to get tips and ideas about how to take forward their careers, and to get some wise words of wisdom from those who've been in the nuclear business for a bit longer as to what to do and what not to do, and how far maybe luck plays a role, but also how you respond to good fortune as you're progressing. And for that purpose, we've got three really interesting speakers who have been in this business for some time, not a very long time in the way that I have perhaps, but their observations from their early career will certainly be more relevant than mine. But nevertheless, they've been in the business. They're all successful to a very considerable degree in their own ways, but I suspect the best is yet to come for all of them as well. We shall see what happens over coming years. So I think really interesting. I'm looking forward very much to their observations. And this is going to be a pretty informal conversation, but we've asked each of them to talk for a few minutes just to get the conversation started. Tell us a little bit about yourself. They've each, at the moment, I suspect their paths may cross in future, but they've each at the moment in rather different places in the gamut of nuclear related careers, in industry. In the case of Fiona, Matt, I guess, I'm not even sure how I characterize you, but somewhere in the think tank stroke parliament area so far, and Heather, of course, becoming a very distinguished academic. So different areas and all important in our nuclear business here in the UK. So Fiona, I think everybody's got your CV, so I won't read out your CV, but Fiona, you spent your career so far in Rolls-Royce, joining that after your engineering degree in 2008, I think it was, and moved through a whole series of positions since then. Perhaps, Fiona, I can ask you to start and kick us off, and then I'll introduce the others in turn. Fiona, please.
Okay, yeah, I'll just give a bit about my background, just kind of verbalise a bit of my career history to date. I'll try not to ramble on too much so we can get on to some more interesting discussion. But I guess what do you need to know about me? So I class myself as a generalist, really, which listening to Pippa Malmgren yesterday when she did her keynote is maybe a good thing to be at the moment. That's not to devalue the role of specialists by any means. Specialists play a very important role, or anybody working in a specialist field. So yeah, my career to date have been in the Rolls-Royce Submarines business. I started at Rolls-Royce on a graduate programme. I then spent 6 years in the reactor control and instrumentation area of the business. I guess I did quite a broad-based engineering degree, so I've always been quite general. But the latter 2 years of my degree lent itself more to electrical controls and instrumentation. So that's where I started. Started off as an engineer and then moved into a team leader position, working at opposite ends of the CAD mid-cycle, so in service and also design. Very proud of that team leader role. I mean, the bulk of the effort was done by the engineers in my team, but we achieved a critical design review milestone for the Dreadnought reactor. Very, very pleased to be part of that. I also achieved my chartership in this role. Between those two roles, I did a bit of a business development role. So I was a technical assistant to the president of the Rolls-Royce Submarines business. So that gave me a really good all-round kind of business education, because at the end of the day, Rolls-Royce is a business. To perform effectively in your role, you need to understand how the business performs. And then I got to a point where I wanted to do something a little bit different. Two things: I wanted to broaden my experience further, and I also felt like I hadn't done enough doing engineering work. Had enough experience at the coalface, so to speak. So I reflected back on what I really enjoyed when I did my degree, and I decided to pick up a role in the reactor core materials area, so completely different to what I had been doing. I then spent 4 happy years there, working on a variety of things: fleet safety justifications, materials research, manufacturing capability development, lots of interactions with partner organisations, international supply chains, all sorts of things there. And then very, very recently, not even a month ago, I was successful at application for a new role where I'm now in an engineering manager role, where I'm responsible for the reactor core, but also another product which I will soon become very familiar with. So we call it CRDMs, control drive mechanisms. So very much in a learning transition phase at the moment. Maybe I'll come more onto my interactions with PONI into some of the discussion. But that I'll leave you with that for now.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Fiona, and that's a great introduction to how you got to where you are now. I think I may just move on to the other speakers, and then I'll throw some questions out which can apply to each of you. The next person is going to be Matt Aries, who, of course, he started with a first degree at Oxford and then a PhD in war studies, which indeed is where Heather is at King's College, but then did a variety of work as a postdoc researcher, worked in Parliament for a while, and most recently, just in the last weeks, has joined RUSI as a senior research fellow, although Matt, you're still based in Berlin. So Matt, over to you.
Malcolm, thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be here virtually. Yeah, I've been involved in PONI one way or another, I think, since going to my first PONI conference at Aldermaston in 2008, which frighteningly seems to be 12 years ago, according to my calendar, and have been involved with PONI in various ways since then. And I think what I've personally found most useful from the PONI experience has been two things. One is, firstly, the opportunity. A couple of times I've had the opportunity to present at PONI conferences or PONI events, and you have in the room some real expertise at these events. And in the early stages of your career, it's quite rare to have the opportunity to have those kinds of people listen to your presentations and hear about your research and comment on it. So I think that's one of PONI's real strengths, is the sort of intergenerational exchange. The other real strength, I think, for me, is the interdisciplinary nature of PONI. Whether it's the participants are drawn from fields including science, engineering, government, military, industry, academia, journalism, and I think the knowledge exchange between fields is particularly has been for me particularly valuable. I was trying to think about what's changed since I first got involved in PONI about 12 years ago. And I mean, in terms of the subject matter of sort of the nuclear field, one of the big things that's changed is that the role of nuclear weapons in the world, in terms of their strategic role and their role in competition between major powers, has really increased, which is not a good thing for the world, but it does make this kind of work very interesting, I think. And the proliferation issues that were around 12 years ago are still around, and in many ways are worse. So there's an enormous amount happening in the nuclear field. which I think is a very exciting thing if you're getting into a career in this field now. And certainly sort of public awareness and attention to these issues, I think, has increased. I think the other thing that's changed in terms of the subject matter is the sort of increased focus on the effect of new technologies on strategic stability, on proliferation, on nuclear security, sort of across the nuclear field. And I think that's a very interesting area. I think the other thing that's has changed to some extent and is changing about this field is demographics since 2008. I mean, I think in terms of the gender balance of events that I've taken part in over the last 12 years, I think there's been some noticeable progress. I think there's still considerable amount of work to do, but I do think there's at least more attention paid, and the overall balance is improving. And I know that Heather will probably Heather might have something to say about women in international security, which is one of a number of groups that are working on these issues and are useful things, I think, for people to get involved in. I think in terms of racial diversity, to be honest, it's still, the field is quite poor in that respect, and I think I would certainly urge people involved in the PONI network who are in senior positions and have the opportunity to bring forward diverse voices in the events that they organise, in terms of who they publish and who they bring along career-wise. I'd very much urge them to make that a serious focus now and in the future, because I think there really is a lot of work still to be done. And I know that there are, in terms of networks, there are some positive developments coming in the UK on that front, but I think there's much more work to do. I was asked to say if I had any advice for people starting a career in this field, which came as a shock to me to learn that I'm not anymore starting my career in this field. But I suppose I would have two bits of advice, neither of which I'm entirely sure I follow very well, but my two bits of advice would be, if possible, to try to combine skills, to have more than one string to your bow, whether it's bridging the gap between science and technology on the one hand and policy on the other hand, or whether it's going and learning a hard language, or whether it's being a historian who then works on nuclear issues. I think combining skills is very important. And the second thing, just speaking as a sort of semi-academic, I would encourage people who have my background on the academic side to really try to get some exposure to the sort of practitioner side of things in terms of policy. For me, that was a brief period in Parliament. But even that brief period, I would say, opened my eyes to an extent to the constraints under which civil servants operate, the constraints under which policymakers and politicians operate, what politicians care about, what it's like to work in a big bureaucracy of which you're a small part with limited ability to influence, how official documents get drafted, where the roots of policy change come from, and so on. And I think that's really useful, and I think it certainly makes you a better academic if you have some exposure to that. I'll leave it there for now, but look forward to more discussion.
Great, Matt. Thank you so much. Very, very complimentary to what Fiona said. So I'd really like to turn to Dr. Heather Williams, who of course is known to many of you, a lecturer in the Defence Studies Department at King's College London, and writes lots of really interesting stuff, especially in relation to nuclear arms control. And Heather really started her nuclear career working in the United States, and then moved over here for much of the academic part of her career. So can see many of these issues as they're seen on both sides of the Atlantic, which I think gives us her a very useful perspective. But I guess she's the most academic of our panelists, if our other two panelists don't mind her being described as such, and therefore has her own particular take on careers in the nuclear field in the UK. So Heather, please.
Great. Thank you so much, Malcolm, and to the entire PONI team. Like Matt, I'm kind of like, it's a little surreal to be here as an alumni. Also, before I start, I really want to congratulate the last panel that was on the next generation in the nuclear field. It was so impressive. And so I really hope that my comments can build on some of that. So I also thought I would just start by saying a few words about my career trajectory. In my career, I really think has been about trying to find the right balance between policy practitioner and scholarship research, with some successes and some failures. So after grad school, I worked in the US Department of Defense for a little while. I worked for a defense contractor. I worked at a think tank at Chatham House, and I never wanted to be an academic. Matt Aries was going to be the academic, not Heather Williams. I didn't want a PhD. And here I am as the academic representative. So what happened? What changed? Well, I pursued a PhD mainly because I had a really deep burning question about arms control that I just couldn't do in my job. And during Q&A, I'm happy to provide some comments on when you should not consider doing a PhD. But to be really blunt about it, the other reason I pursued a PhD was because I was really ambitious, and I was told if you get a PhD, you're likely to get promoted faster. And so it wasn't any sort of intellectual altruism. There was a bit of selfishness there. And so how did I go from being at Chatham House thinking I didn't want to be an academic to where I am? The really big change for me came, one of my supervisors said to me, well, you know, you get to choose what type of an academic you want to be. You don't have to be, you know, wearing a corduroy jacket with elbow patches sitting in the ivory tower. There's nothing wrong with that. I just knew that wasn't what I wanted to do. And so when I felt like someone gave me that agency to shape my own career, to create my own dream job, that was really empowering. And so what I've tried to do since then is to be an academic who does policy relevant work, who regularly interacts with practitioners. Having worked in DoD, I can relate to a lot of them, and engaging with contemporary questions. So that's kind of how I've ended up here. What's changed in the field since I started? I have a lot of similar points to Matt, actually. It's a lot more diverse. When I started, and it sounds so strange saying that, but when I had started out, I would often be the only woman in the room. In the US community, there were some wonderful female mentors, Elaine Bunn, Jan Nolan, but it still was the gender imbalance was really obvious. And that's improved so much. And I think you can see it just in the evolution of PONI conference agendas, right? This agenda is so wonderful in terms of gender balance. I think it's also improved in terms of regional diversity and perspectives. So now I think we're making a much bigger effort to hear from people like Irma Arguello in Argentina, Hubert Foy, Raji Rajagopalan. And to be clear, I mean, those voices from outside of the transatlantic relationship, those voices have always been there. I think we're just making more of an effort to try to be more inclusive in that sense. However, I feel like I can't talk about diversity at this moment in time without also acknowledging what's going on in the world, and the protests that we're seeing following the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. And this is something that we have to confront in our own field as well, right? We have to do better. We have to try to make this field more equitable, more accessible, especially to Black and other people of color, LGBTQ, non-neurotypical and not able-bodied, and also people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And I think that the previous panel touched on all of those. And so I'm really glad to see there is this increased awareness of it. And again, Matt hit on a lot of these in his presentation, and it's just something we all need to be more conscious of. I think one really important step is going to be the launch of the UK branch of WCAPS, Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security, on June 24th, and the important work going on by Bonnie Jenkins and Anu Damle. So that's kind of how it's changed, but just to say we still have a lot to do. I also was asked to offer some advice, so I'll do this pretty quickly because I don't know if I don't know how much I take my own advice sometimes. So 3 very quick pieces of advice. The first one is know your brief and know it inside and out. Whatever topic you've been assigned, or if you have the privilege of choosing your own topics, whatever you are assigned, even if it's not your dream job, go out and know that thing better than anybody else in the room. And that might be really hard. I can give some examples of when I've had to try to do this, but I get that when you're first starting out, it can be really frustrating because it's like, I'm only working on this one thing and I want to be working on that. You have to start with that first Lego block and get to know it really well. And then you can add another thing and you can add another thing and gradually build up. So first piece of advice, know your brief. The second one is to hone your craft. It's not always about what you know, it's about how you communicate it. So I think in our field, there's 5 really important skills, right? So analysis, writing, briefing, managing. And by managing, I mean managing your own time and manage up as well as down, and fundraising, which can come a little bit later. And I think it's very rare to get formal training in all of these. Like I think I had quasi-formal training in a few, but this is where PONI comes in, and PONI is so important that it gives you these opportunities to hone your craft, to practice briefing, to practice writing. If you know your brief really well, then you should be able to present it to an expert in the field and take their feedback and get that kind of engagement. And that's really been, for me at least, the biggest benefit is, you know, the very first niche issue I had to work on became my first PONI presentation in 2008. And then last piece of advice is to talk to people that you disagree with. As some of you know, I participated in the humanitarian impacts conferences and did a lot of work on the ban treaty. And it was probably the most beneficial professional experience I've had to date. It was talking to people who challenged me every day. It was trying to understand their view of the world. And so again, this is something where PONI is playing such an important role, I think. The network is so vast. It has so much diversity already that if you feel really strongly about something, go find someone who disagrees with you and say, hey, can you help me understand where you're coming from here? They're not a bad person. They're not stupid, despite things that might come up on social media. And so I think it's important to have this forum where you can engage with them and just try to learn a different view of the world, really. And so with that, I'll end there for now.